The cold, damp fog crept through the narrow streets of Paris, twisting around the lamp-posts and seeping into the corners of the dimly lit cafes. At the heart of the fog, a body was found, as lifeless as the city itself in the dead of night. Yet there was something peculiar about this case, something that tugged at the edges of Maigrè's mind, forcing him to see beyond the obvious. Something more than the crime, something lurking just out of sight. Maigret had long learned that in Paris the past never truly leaves, and neither do the secrets people thought they buried. As he stood over the body, the shadows seemed to whisper, but only Maigret could hear them, and those whispers were beginning to tell him a truth he was not ready to hear. Before we dive deeper into the mystery, remember to like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that bell for more gripping tales from the world of Georges Simenon. The night was colder than usual, and the mist from the Seine rolled like ghostly curtains through the narrow arteries of Paris. Rue des Martyrs was almost deserted, its shopfronts shuttered, its windows blind to the world. Only the rhythmic sound of water dripping from a broken gutter disturbed the stillness. Then came another sound, a policeman's whistle, sharp and urgent, slicing through the fog like a blade. Maigret arrived minutes later, his overcoat buttoned against the chill, his pipe unlit but ready. The yellow glow of a gas lamp revealed a small shape lying on the cobblestones near the steps of a shuttered cafe. A man, middle-aged, respectably dressed, but without an overcoat, which was strange for a night like this. His face was pale, his eyes half open, and his hands rested as if he had fallen asleep. Yet the bruise at his temple told a different story. The young constable, cheeks red from the cold, saluted nervously. "We found him just after 1 o'clock, Chief Inspector. No papers, no witnesses." Maigret crouched beside the body, his large hand hovering over the man's chest. Cold, rigid. "No sign of struggle?" he asked quietly. "None, sir." Maigret's eyes swept the street. The fog had swallowed everything beyond 10 meters, making the world feel small and claustrophobic. "And the café?" he asked, nodding toward the darkened facade behind the corpse. "Closed since midnight. The owner says he heard nothing." Maigret's pipe stem moved between his teeth, unlit, thoughtful. "Heard nothing," he repeated. It was a phrase he had heard too often. People in Paris had a remarkable way of hearing nothing when something terrible happened just beneath their window. He rose, looking down once more at the man's lifeless form. "Call Dr. Paul, and have Lucas check the alley behind the café. There's always something people think isn't worth mentioning." As the constable hurried off, Maigret stood still for a long moment. The fog coiled around him, and he felt, as he sometimes did, that Paris itself was watching him. The buildings, the street lamps, the invisible eyes behind curtains. It was a living organism, this city, and tonight it had swallowed another secret. When Dr. Paul arrived, his breath clouded the air as he knelt to examine the body. "A blow to the head," he murmured, lifting the man's hair. "Hard, but not immediately fatal. He might have stumbled a few meters before collapsing." "Any sign of robbery?" "None. His pockets are intact. Wallet's missing, though. But look here." The doctor reached into the inner pocket of the dead man's jacket and drew out a small envelope. It was damp, the ink smudged, but the address was still legible. Madame Lemoine, Rue de l'Abbaye, Saint-Germain-des-Prés. Maigret frowned. The handwriting was delicate, unmistakably feminine. Inside the envelope was a single folded sheet of paper, empty, not a word written on it. "Perhaps a letter he never sent," said the doctor. "Or one he was meant to deliver," Maigret muttered. The carriage from the Quai des Orfèvres arrived to take the body. Maigret watched as they lifted the man gently onto the stretcher. There was something about his face that seemed oddly peaceful, as though death had released him from a long worry. He turned to Lucas, who had reappeared from the alley. "Anything?" "Only footprints, sir. 2 sets. One his, one smaller, lighter. Could be a woman's." Maigret's eyes narrowed. "Leading which way?" "Toward the river." He drew in a deep breath, the air thick with moisture, and the faint scent of coal smoke from a nearby chimney. "Have the prints photographed before the morning fog wipes them out, and send someone to Rue de l'Abbaye. I want to know who Madame Lemoine is before sunrise." The team dispersed, leaving Maigret standing alone under the gaslight. The faint hum of the city returned. A distant carriage, a barking dog, a door closing somewhere beyond sight. The detective stared down the street where the fog seemed to pulse like a living thing. It was, he thought, the kind of night that could make people disappear. By dawn, the report from Rue de l'Abbaye came in. Madame Lemoine, it seemed, was an elderly widow who rented rooms to students and travelling clerks. She had never heard of the man described by Maigret. But when she saw the empty envelope, her face turned pale. "This paper," she whispered. "It's mine, my stationery. But that's impossible. I never gave it to anyone." "Have you had any visitors lately, madame?" Maigret asked gently. She hesitated. "A man came 3 nights ago. Said he was delivering a message from someone I once knew. He seemed polite enough, but when I asked his name, he smiled and said it didn't matter." Maigret's brow furrowed. "And did he leave anything behind?" "No, but he seemed nervous. He looked over his shoulder more than once." When Maigret left the apartment, the morning light was weak, filtered through low clouds. He paused on the steps and lit his pipe at last, the smoke curling lazily around his face. There was something about the old woman's tone, the tremor in her voice, the fear she couldn't quite name, that unsettled him. Back at the Quai des Orfèvres, Janvier had already compiled a list of recent missing persons matching the victim's description. "Nothing definite yet," he said, placing the files on Maigret's desk, but there was a clerk from the Ministry of Finance reported missing 2 days ago, name of René Delaunay. Maigret scanned the report. Married, no children, lived alone since his wife's passing, no criminal record, a quiet life. "And the connection to Madame Lemoine?" "None so far." Maigret tapped his pipe against the edge of the desk. "Then there's something we're missing. People don't die for no reason, Janvier, especially quiet ones." That evening, as the sun sank behind the rooftops and the city lights flickered to life, Maigret returned to Rue des Martyrs. The café was open now, the smell of coffee and tobacco drifting into the street. The owner, a thin man with deep lines around his mouth, wiped his hands nervously when Maigret entered. "You were here the night it happened?" Maigret asked. "Of course, monsieur. I close at midnight sharp." "And you heard nothing?" The man hesitated. "Only footsteps. I thought it was a couple walking by. Then maybe a cry, but it was so faint, I wasn't sure." "Did you see anyone?" "A woman, I think, in a light coat. She was crossing toward the river." "Alone?" "Yes, I think so." Maigret left the café, his mind turning. A woman in a light coat, footsteps, a cry, the envelope. Every piece fit together, yet the picture remained blurred. He walked toward the river, where the fog was rising again, thicker than before. Somewhere beneath that veil lay the answer. To who the dead man was, why he carried an empty letter, and what secret bound him to a woman who claimed to know nothing. As the bells of Notre Dame tolled in the distance, Maigret paused on the bridge and stared down into the swirling water below. The Seine moved sluggishly, carrying the reflection of the street lamps like streaks of fire. He took a slow drag from his pipe and let the smoke drift out over the water. "You knew her," he murmured to the night. "You went to her door and said nothing. Why?" The fog gave no answer. Only the river moved, whispering softly beneath the stone arches. Somewhere in Paris a woman was waiting, and Maigret knew she was the next piece of the puzzle. The next morning began grey and quiet, as if Paris herself had chosen to keep her voice low after the night's events. The fog lingered above the Seine like an old memory refusing to fade. At the Quai des Orfèvres, Maigret stood by the window of his office, watching the smoke from his pipe rise and dissolve into the still air. On his desk lay a photograph of the dead man, René Delaunay, taken hours before dawn under the unforgiving glare of a street lamp. There was something about Delaunay's expression that bothered him. The face was calm, composed even, as if the man had died not in fear, but in resignation. Beside the photograph lay the empty letter, its paper creased and smudged by water. To anyone else it was meaningless. To Maigret it was a witness, silent but not mute. Janvier entered quietly, a file in hand. "We checked Delaunay's apartment, Chief. No signs of forced entry. Everything neat, as if he'd just stepped out for an errand. But—" He hesitated. "There's something odd." Maigret turned, one brow lifting. "Odd?" "We found a second key to the apartment, hidden behind a painting, engraved with initials. CL. No trace of who that might be. Neighbours say he rarely had visitors except for a woman who came by about once a week. Mid-30s, dark hair, always well-dressed." "A woman with initials CL," Maigret repeated softly. "And no one knew her name?" "None of the neighbours dared ask." He nodded slowly. That was typical. In Paris, curiosity was a dangerous habit. People preferred their mysteries to remain unsolved, especially when they might be part of them. "Anything else?" Janvier opened the file. "Yes. Delaunay withdrew 2,000 francs from his account 2 days before his death. It hasn't been found. Money, a missing key, a mysterious woman. The silent witness was beginning to whisper after all. By midday, Maigret found himself at a small café in Saint-Germain-des-Prés. The owner, a heavy-set man with a grey moustache, recognized the inspector at once and led him to a quiet corner near the window. "Delaunay used to come here," Maigret said, his voice low. The owner nodded. "Every Thursday afternoon, always the same table, ordered coffee, read Le Matin, never spoke much, except once." Maigret leaned forward. "Once?" "There was a woman, dark hair, elegant. She sat down without asking. They talked for maybe 20 minutes. It wasn't a pleasant conversation. You could see it in their faces. He looked ill by the time she left." "Did you hear what they said?" The man spread his hands apologetically. "Only one thing. As she got up, she said, 'You shouldn't have written that letter.'" Maigret's eyes narrowed slightly. "And what did he say?" "Nothing. He just sat there staring into his cup." The inspector sat in silence for a while, the hum of the café filling the gaps between thoughts, the smell of roasted coffee beans mingled with the faint odour of wet wool from the coats hanging by the door. Paris breathed around him, alive yet indifferent. He had seen it before. 2 people at a table, one trying to forget, the other trying to remind. When he returned to headquarters, Lucas was waiting with fresh information. "We found out who CL might be, Cécile Lemoine. Niece of the widow you spoke to yesterday." "Madame Lemoine's niece," Maigret murmured. "So the connection wasn't coincidence after all." "She works at a dress shop near the Place Saint-Michel. Should I bring her in?" Maigret shook his head. No, I'll go myself. The shop was bright and perfumed, a world apart from the grey streets outside. Cécile Lemoine stood behind the counter, arranging silk scarves in a glass case. She was younger than he expected, perhaps 30, with sharp features softened by a kind of weary elegance. When she saw his badge, a flicker of something, fear, perhaps, crossed her eyes. "Inspector Maigret," she said quietly, "I wondered when you would come." "You know why I'm here?" "Yes." "About René." She looked away, her hands trembling slightly. He shouldn't have gone there that night. "Then you knew he planned to meet someone?" Her silence was answer enough. "He was carrying an envelope addressed to your aunt," Maigret continued. "Do you know what was meant to be inside?" "A confession," she whispered. "Or a warning. I'm not sure which." "From him?" She nodded. "René was afraid. He said he'd seen something at work. Something that could ruin people. He didn't tell me what, only that it was dangerous to speak of it. He wanted to hide the letter with my aunt because he trusted her. And the envelope was empty when we found it." Cécile's lips parted in shock. "Empty?" "Yes." She turned pale. "Then someone must have taken it. Someone who knew." Maigret studied her face, the trembling eyelids, the quickened breath. She wasn't lying, at least not completely. But she was holding something back. "Did you meet him that night?" Her eyes darted away. "I was supposed to, at the Pont Neuf. But when I arrived, he wasn't there. I waited an hour. And after that?" She hesitated. "I went home." "Alone?" "Yes." He let the word hang between them like smoke. Then he reached into his coat and produced the spare key found in Delaunay's apartment. "You recognize this?" Cécile's breath caught. "Where did you find it?" "In his room, behind a painting." She stared at the small piece of metal as if it were something alive. "He told me to keep it safe," she murmured. "I gave it back to him the night before he died." "Do you know what it opened?" She shook her head. "No, he only said it wasn't for a door." Back at the quay, Maigret replayed her words in his mind. Not for a door, the phrase gnawed at him. What kind of key opened nothing visible? A drawer, perhaps? A locker? A safe? Somewhere, something waited to be found. As the evening deepened, Paris grew restless. Rain began to fall. Light, steady, endless. The detective sat in his office, staring at the map of the city spread across his desk. His pipe smoke curled upward in lazy spirals, dissolving into the dim light. He could almost feel Delaunay's presence in the room, silent but insistent, urging him toward the truth. At 9 o'clock, the phone rang. It was Lucas. "Chief, we've got something. The key, it matches a private storage box at the Gare de Lyon, belonged to Delaunay." Maigret's heart quickened slightly, though his voice remained calm. "Meet me there." The rain had turned the streets into mirrors. Under the arched roof of the station, the air smelled of iron, oil, and damp stone. The clerk led them to a small metal box, the kind used by travellers to store valuables. When the lock turned, it gave a faint click that echoed in the empty corridor. Inside lay only two things, a torn newspaper clipping and a photograph. The clipping, dated a week earlier, spoke of a scandal brewing at the Ministry of Finance, rumours of embezzlement, missing funds and falsified ledgers. The photograph showed Delaunay standing beside a man whose face had been carefully scratched out. "A silent witness," Maigret murmured. Lucas glanced at him. "What do you mean?" "This man," Maigret said, pointing to the photograph. Whoever he was, Delaunay erased him, but not enough. He wanted to hide the truth, not destroy it. The detective slipped the photo into his coat pocket. Find out who else works in that department. Quietly. Someone's watching us now, Lucas. I can feel it. As they left the station, the night swallowed them whole once more. The rain had softened into mist again, the kind that blurred the edges of the world. Somewhere beyond the glass roof, Paris kept its secrets. For now. Maigret paused before stepping into the car. Every clue we find, he said softly, feels like it's been waiting for us, as if Delaunay knew exactly how we'd follow. Lucas frowned. You think he planned it? I think, Maigret said, lighting his pipe, that the dead man isn't finished talking yet. The corridors of the Quai des Orfèvres had a peculiar silence that morning, the kind of silence that meant something was stirring beneath the surface. Maigret could feel it the moment he stepped inside. Lucas was already there, his coat still damp from the rain, eyes fixed on the photograph they'd recovered from the storage box. The image had been enlarged overnight in the forensics room. The man beside Delaunay, though scratched out, still left a faint outline of his features. Tall, narrow shoulders, a hint of a moustache. Enough to suggest identity, but not enough to confirm it. Janvier entered with a folder and set it down gently. We compared the photo to the ministry's staff directory chief. There's a possible match. Claude Lenoir, deputy accountant. He's been absent from work since Monday. No explanation. Lenoir, Maigret repeated, his tone thoughtful. Any relation to the Lemoine family? None that we can find, but there's something else. Janvier opened the folder, revealing a series of statements. 3 nights before Delaunay died, there was a disturbance near the Quai de la Râpée. A witness reported seeing 2 men arguing by the river. One matched Delaunay's description, and the other. Uncertain, the witness said he wore a dark coat and had a distinctive limp. Maigret leaned back in his chair, the floor creaking softly beneath his boots. A limp. That detail, trivial as it seemed, anchored itself in his mind like a splinter. And Lenoir? He was wounded in an accident 5 years ago, right leg. The inspector's pipe stem tapped gently against his teeth. So they knew each other, Delaunay and Lenoir, both involved in the ministry. One ends up dead, the other vanishes, and a letter gone. He rose, heavy coat shifting as he reached for his hat. Lucas, we're going for a walk. The morning rain had ceased, leaving behind the smell of wet stone and river mud. The Seine moved sluggishly under the bridges, carrying with it fragments of leaves and the faint glimmer of reflected light. The city was awake now. Trams clattering, market women shouting, newspapers fluttering like startled birds. They reached Lenoir's apartment, a modest place on Rue du Chevaleret. The concierge was a thin, suspicious woman who looked as if she resented every knock on her door. Monsieur Lenoir, she said, squinting at them. Gone. 2 days now, left with a suitcase. Didn't say where. Did he receive visitors recently? Maigret asked. Only once, a woman, tall, dark hair, well-dressed. Looked nervous. Would you recognize her if you saw her again? I might. Lucas handed her a small photograph of Cécile Lemoine. The woman's eyes widened. That's her. Maigret thanked her and left without another word. The air outside had grown heavy again, as though the fog was preparing to return. She lied to us, Lucas said quietly. Maigret nodded. Yes, but people lie for different reasons, sometimes to protect, sometimes to survive. We'll see which this is. They walked to a small café near the Gare d'Austerlitz, one of those old places where the tables were scratched and the air forever smelled of tobacco. Maigret ordered a calvados and let the warmth seep through him. His mind was already building the picture. Delaunay, burdened by guilt or fear, hiding a letter, that could expose something at the ministry. Lenoir, perhaps a friend, perhaps an accomplice. Cécile, the woman caught between them. The phone behind the counter rang, and the waiter gestured to Maigret. "For you, Inspector?" It was Janvier. "We found Lenoir's suitcase, Chief, left at the Gare du Nord, unclaimed." "Contents?" "Mostly clothes, but there's something else. A revolver, recently fired." Maigret's eyes darkened. "Have it brought to forensics. And Janvier, don't speak of this outside the office." When he returned to headquarters, the revolver lay on the evidence table, its metal dull with fingerprints. One bullet missing. It smelled faintly of oil and smoke. "Fired within the last 48 hours, said Dr. Paul, who was examining it under the lamp. "Caliber matches the bruise on Delaunay's temple. Could have been used to strike, not shoot." "Then whoever killed him didn't mean to at first," Maigret murmured. "A blow, not a bullet." An argument turned violent. That evening, Maigret found himself once more at Cécile Lemoine's door. She opened it slowly, her expression wary. "I told you everything I know," she said. "No," Maigret replied calmly. "You told me everything you thought I should know." He stepped inside. The apartment was small but tasteful. Flowers on the table, a book half open by the window, the faint scent of perfume still hanging in the air. "Why did you visit Lenoir?" he asked. She froze. "Who told you that?" "The concierge." For a moment her facade cracked. "He called me," she said, finally, voice trembling. "Said he needed help. He was afraid the police would think he killed René. But when I went, he was already gone." "You didn't find it strange that both men you knew vanished or died within 2 days?" Tears glimmered in her eyes. "You don't understand. They were friends, colleagues once. But something happened between them. Something to do with money. René said Lenoir had found a way to move government funds into private accounts quietly. He was terrified. He wanted to expose it. And Lenoir? He begged him not to, said it would destroy them both. Maigret's gaze softened, but only slightly. And the letter? She hesitated. René said it was his insurance. If anything happened to him, it would reach the right hands. I think Lenoir knew about it. That's why he followed him that night. Did you ever see the letter? No, only the envelope. Maigret exhaled slowly, the sound deep and steady. Then you understand why I can't take your word alone. She nodded, defeated. Do what you must. Outside, the rain had returned, gentle and relentless. The inspector pulled his collar up and walked toward the bridge, pipe glowing faintly in the dark. The city's reflections danced on the wet pavement, distorting the world into fragments of light and motion. He stopped near the parapet and looked into the water. Beneath the rippling surface, he imagined the shadows of those whose secrets were now rising back to haunt the living. Behind him, footsteps approached, slow, deliberate. He turned slightly, hand instinctively near his coat pocket. It was Janvier, breathless from the climb. "Chief," he said, "we've just had a report from the outskirts of Ivry, a man found dead in a boarding house, no papers, but the description matches Claude Lenoir." Maigret's face remained unreadable, though his eyes darkened like the river beneath him.
"How?" "Gunshot to the chest, fired at close range." Maigret stared into the mist as if trying to see the shape of what was coming. 2 men, one beaten, one shot. The same thread ran through both, and at its center stood a woman with trembling hands and an empty letter. He took one last draw from his pipe and let the smoke vanish into the fog. "We'll go to Ivry," he said quietly. "But something tells me we won't find what we're looking for there." He began to walk, his heavy silhouette fading slowly into the mist, the hunter moving deeper into his own maze, following the whispers that refused to die. The small boarding house in Ivry stood at the edge of the city like a forgotten relic, its brick facade streaked with soot, its curtains yellowed by time. The landlady, a stout woman with a tired face, led Maigret and Lucas up a narrow staircase that groaned under their weight. The room at the top smelled faintly of tobacco and disinfectant. Claude Lenoir lay on the iron bed, one hand still clutching the sheet, as if he'd tried to pull it over himself. The bullet had entered just below the collarbone, clean and fatal. There was no sign of struggle, no overturned furniture, no forced door. It was the kind of scene that tried too hard to look ordinary. Dr. Paul straightened after his examination. Time of death, roughly 8 hours ago. Close-range shot, as you said. Powder burns on the shirt. Maigret stood by the window, watching the grey light spill through the half-closed shutters. "Who found him?" "The maid," the landlady replied nervously. He was supposed to pay this morning. When he didn't answer, she forced the door. Poor man." "Did he have visitors yesterday?" "Yes. A woman. Dark hair, coat with fur trim. She came just before dinner. I didn't see her leave." Lucas shot Maigret a knowing glance. Cécile. The inspector didn't answer. He walked slowly around the room, his eyes moving from the half-open suitcase to the glass of water on the table, untouched. There was a faint ring of dust around the bottom of the glass, as if it had been placed there hours before death. On the chair by the bed lay a folded newspaper. The page was turned to the finance section. Maigret bent down. Certain paragraphs were underlined in pencil, references to the same scandal hinted at in Delaunay's clipping. "He kept following it," Maigret murmured, "even while running for his life." Lucas checked the drawers, then paused. "Chief," he held up a small ticket stub. "Train to Liège, dated yesterday." Belgium. The same direction the scandal might have reached if Delaunay's fears were right. "He meant to flee," Maigret said quietly, but someone stopped him first. The body was taken away and the room sealed. On the street outside, Paris hummed faintly in the distance, the deep, low pulse of a city that never truly slept. Maigret lit his pipe, the match flaring, briefly in the damp air. "He didn't shoot himself," he said. "It's too neat. Whoever killed him wanted to close the circle before we could step in." "Then who?" Lucas asked. Maigret watched a tram rattle past, its bell echoing down the narrow street. The one person both men trusted enough to let in. The one who could move between them without suspicion. He didn't say her name. He didn't need to. Back at the Quai des Orfèvres, the rain began again, tapping against the tall windows like impatient fingers. The corridors filled with the faint smell of damp wool and ink. Reports came in, none useful. Lenoir's revolver had been wiped clean. The ministry denied any knowledge of missing funds, and Cécile Lemoine had vanished. Maigret spent the afternoon in silence, walking slowly through the labyrinth of his own thoughts. Each step brought back fragments: Delaunay's empty envelope, Lenoir's erased face, Cécile's trembling hands. The pattern was there, like a faint watermark beneath the surface, but he hadn't yet found the right light to make it appear. Toward evening, Janvier entered, hesitating at the door. "Chief, there's a man here asking to see you. Says he used to work with Delaunay." "Name?" "Henri Vautrin, accountant, retired." "Send him in." The visitor was thin, elderly, his overcoat too large for his frame. He removed his hat respectfully. "Inspector, I heard about René. I thought you should know." He wasn't the kind of man to get mixed up in scandal, but he worried too much. About Lenoir.
about something at the ministry. What kind of something? The old man glanced toward the door before speaking. Files went missing, financial statements. Then they reappeared, adjusted. Delaunay kept copies, said he'd deliver them if things went wrong. I told him to be careful. That was 3 nights before he died. Did he tell you where he hid them? No, but he mentioned the name of a cafe. Le Phare. Said if anything happened, I should remember that word. When Vautrin left, Maigret remained seated for a long while. The city outside had turned golden with the glow of lamps, and the rain now shimmered like thin threads of glass. Le Phare, the lighthouse. He knew the place, a small bar near the Quai Voltaire, favoured by clerks and minor officials. That night he went alone. The place was nearly empty, its interior lit by a single kerosene lamp that hissed softly. The bartender looked up, startled, when Maigret entered. "I'm looking for a man named Delaunay," he said. The bartender frowned. "He hasn't been here in days. Used to sit in the back, near the window." Maigret took the seat, feeling the faint impression still left on the wood. The table bore shallow scratches, random at first glance, but one pattern repeated, a small cross etched beside the word abri, shelter. The inspector's gaze drifted to the far wall, where a wooden coat rack stood. One peg was loose. He rose, tested it, and found it turned slightly under his hand. Inside the hollow peg was a folded piece of paper. He opened it carefully. It was one of Delaunay's copies, a ledger page, stamped with the ministry's seal, but altered in 2 places. Money transferred, signatures forged. Beneath it, written in Delaunay's small, deliberate hand, "If this reaches you, it means I was right." The sound of footsteps made him turn. A man stood in the doorway, heavy coat, hat pulled low. Maigret couldn't see his face, but the limp was unmistakable. "Too late, Inspector," the voice said softly. The figure turned and vanished into the rain before Maigret could move. By the time he reached the street, the man was gone, swallowed by the crowd of umbrellas and carriage lights. Lucas arrived moments later, breathless. "Chief, we just traced the bullet from Lenoir's body. It's the same weapon that struck Delaunay." Maigret's pipe trembled between his teeth. "Then we're not dealing with 2 murders, Lucas. We're dealing with one story. And the city itself is hiding the rest." They stood there for a moment, the rain whispering against their coats, the gaslights flickering in the mist. Somewhere deep in the city's heart, the truth waited, buried beneath ledgers, lies, and the quiet guilt of those who had watched too long in silence. Maigret exhaled, the smoke mingling with the night. "Find Cécile," he said at last, "before the people who killed them both find her first." And with that, he walked off toward the river, the echo of his steps fading into the rhythmic murmur of the Seine, a sound as old as the city, as restless as the human heart. The following day broke under a low, bruised sky that seemed to press against the rooftops of Paris. The fog had given way to a thin drizzle, a steady whisper against the window panes of the Quai des Orfèvres. Inside, the atmosphere was taut, as if the walls themselves were listening. Maigret sat at his desk, sleeves rolled, pipe unlit. Before him lay the recovered ledger page from Le Phare. It looked harmless enough, a simple document, a few columns of numbers, a signature. Yet to him it felt like holding a live wire. Whoever had altered those figures had risked everything to do so. Whoever had killed to retrieve it was not done yet. Janvier entered quietly, rain dripping from his hat. "Chief, we've traced Cécile's last movement. She was seen yesterday near the Gare de Lyon, buying a ticket, then cancelling it minutes later." "Why cancel?" "She told the clerk she had forgotten something important. After that, no one saw her." Maigret nodded slowly. She's still here, then. Somewhere she feels safe. Lucas arrived moments later, carrying a file. We've been digging into the ministry's internal audits. Delaunay and Lenoir were both assigned to a special commission 3 years ago. Reconstruction. Fund for the Eastern Rail Line. It handled millions in post-war infrastructure grants. Large sums, Maigret murmured. Too large to disappear without a shadow. Lucas hesitated. There's more. The commission's director at the time was Armand Bresson. The name hung in the air like a sour note. Maigret knew it. Bresson, the ambitious civil servant whose rise had been as smooth as it was inexplicable. Polished, discreet, with friends in high places, the sort of man who left no fingerprints on anything, but whose scent lingered everywhere. Bring me everything we have on Bresson, Maigret said. By noon, the file lay open on his desk. Awards, appointments, committee memberships, an immaculate career. But in the margins of one report, a small notation caught Maigret's eye. Confidential correspondence, Lemoine, Cécile. The pipe trembled faintly between his fingers. So she wasn't merely an accessory, he said softly. She was inside the machine. Janvier frowned. You think she worked for him? Or against him? Perhaps both. He rose abruptly, heavy coat swinging from the rack, and motioned to Lucas. We're paying Monsieur Bresson a visit. The ministry building on Rue de Rivoli stood immaculate under the drizzle, its marble steps polished, its guards impassive. Bresson's office was large, too large for its modest occupant, a tall, silver-haired man whose smile came too easily. Chief Inspector Maigret, he said warmly, gesturing to a chair. Such a pleasure. I read about the unfortunate deaths of your 2 clerks. Terrible business. Indeed, Maigret replied, settling in. You knew them? By name. Delaunay, I recall, was meticulous to a fault. Lenoir, less so. Not everyone can handle the pressures of administration, you understand. Would you say they were friends? Bresson's smile flickered. Colleagues, nothing more. And Mademoiselle Cécile Lemoine? A pause. An efficient assistant, nothing remarkable. Maigret's gaze didn't waver. She's disappeared. I'm sure she'll turn up. People often panic when the police begin asking questions. It's human nature. The inspector studied the man's face, calm, practiced, empty. It was the face of a bureaucrat who had long ago learned to make guilt look like civility. Did you know Delaunay was keeping copies of the reconstruction ledgers? Bresson's eyelids fluttered almost imperceptibly. Copies? That would be a breach of protocol, or a matter of conscience. For a brief moment, something like irritation crossed his features. Inspector, I'm not sure what you're implying, but I hope the ministry is not about to be smeared by rumor. Rumor? Maigret repeated. Yes. Rumors have a way of walking, talking, and sometimes dying. When he left the office, the rain had stopped. The clouds had thinned into strips of dull light, and the smell of wet
asphalt filled the air. Lucas fell into step beside him. You think he's behind it? Maigret didn't answer immediately. He's too clean. That kind of cleanliness only comes after much washing. They returned to the quay just before dusk. The city had begun to glow again, lamps flickering, the hum of evening traffic weaving through the streets. A telegram awaited Maigret on his desk. No signature, no address, just a single line. Meet me where he fell. Midnight. He stared at it for a long time, then folded it carefully into his pocket. Lucas, he said quietly, we're going back to Rue des Martyrs. The fog was thicker than ever when they arrived. The street looked exactly as it had that first night. The same faint light from the cafe, the same hum of distant wheels. Only the memory of the body was missing. At 5 minutes to midnight, A figure emerged from the shadows. A woman, her coat drawn tight, her steps hesitant. Cécile. "Don't come closer," she said. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were steady. "They're watching." "Who?" "The ones who made this happen. You think it was just about money?" It wasn't. Renee found proof that the reconstruction fund never existed. The money went to shell companies, all under Bresson's control. When he confronted him, they killed him. Then Lenoir. "And you?" "I was the courier. I moved the papers without knowing what they meant, until it was too late." "Why call me here?" "Because they'll kill me next," she whispered, "and I can't run anymore." A sound echoed from the alley. A door slamming, footsteps quick and sharp. Maigret turned, but the fog swallowed everything. When he looked back, Cécile was gone. Only the faint smell of her perfume lingered, drifting into the mist. Lucas appeared moments later. "Chief, what happened?" "She vanished," Maigret said, his voice low. "Like the truth itself." He looked down the empty street, the gaslights flickering like dying stars. Somewhere in the labyrinth of Paris, the line between the living and the guilty had blurred. The case was no longer about Delaunay or Lenoir. It was about something older, heavier, the machinery of power and the price of silence. Maigret lit his pipe, the glow briefly illuminating his face. "The past," he murmured, "has a long shadow, and we're standing right in it." The smoke rose and vanished into the night, leaving only the quiet pulse of the city and the certainty that the real hunt had only just begun. The next morning, the Seine carried a dull sheen beneath the grey light. The fog had thinned, but the city remained subdued, as if every window, every cobblestone, waited for a truth it did not wish to hear. Inside the Quai des Orfèvres, the air was heavy with smoke and silence. Maigret had not slept. He sat in his office, coat still on, his eyes tracing the faint creases of the telegram Cécile had sent him. She had vanished.
Again, but not without leaving echoes. Janvier had spent the night combing through witness reports near Rue de Martyrs. A flower seller swore she had seen a woman matching Cécile's description board, a carriage, shortly after midnight. Destination unknown. Others remembered only the fog and the distant tolling of church bells. Maigret listened without interruption. He had learned that truth never came in shouts. It came in whispers, half-heard and easily missed. "Find out who rented that carriage," he said finally, "and check the driver's route." Lucas entered, holding a small brown envelope. "This came by post an hour ago. No return address." Inside was a photograph. It showed Bresson standing beside another man, Lenoir, outside the ministry building. Behind them, barely visible, was a woman walking away, head turned slightly toward the camera. Cécile. On the back, a single line in ink. He knew too much. Maigret's jaw tightened. "They're warning us," he said. "But why send this now, unless—" He turned the photo over again. "Unless she didn't send it." The inspector rose, moving to the window. The city's reflection shimmered faintly on the glass, bridges, rooftops, and the pale thread of the river. "Someone wants this case to end," he murmured, "and they're beginning to lose patience." That afternoon, Maigret and Lucas went to the ministry archives. The air inside was cold, still, and lined with rows of forgotten files that smelled of dust and ink. The clerk, a timid young man with spectacles too large for his face, led them to a locked cabinet. "These are the reconstruction records, monsieur," he said, fumbling for keys. "Though some files are missing, misplaced years ago perhaps." "Or removed," Maigret said softly. He scanned the remaining folders until his eyes caught a name. Projet Estrail 1924. He opened it. Inside were memoranda, signed contracts, and one letter written in careful flowing script. The signature at the bottom read, Cécile Lemoine. Lucas leaned over. So she was involved officially. Yes, Maigret said, but this letter isn't what it seems. It was a report to the director of the fund, advising on discrepancies between allocated and transferred sums. She had raised concerns, quietly, properly, on record, which meant that at one time she had tried to do the right thing, and someone had buried it. A sound echoed down the corridor. A footstep, deliberate, approaching. Maigret closed the file. A shadow crossed the frosted glass of the door. When it opened, Bresson stood there, immaculate as ever, gloved hands folded. "Chief Inspector," he said coolly, "I was informed of your presence. May I ask why my archives are being disturbed?" Maigret smiled faintly. "You may. But I doubt you'll like the answer." Bresson's eyes flicked to the open folder. "Ah, the old rail project, ancient history. Surely your time is better spent on murders than on dusty ledgers." "Perhaps, but it seems these murders are built on those ledgers." For the first time, the polished tone slipped. "That's a dangerous suggestion. Truth usually is." When Bresson left, the silence he left behind was thick and uneasy. Lucas exhaled slowly. "He's rattled." "Good," Maigret said. "Rattled men make mistakes." That night, as rain returned, Maigret walked alone along the Quai Voltaire. The Seine moved like black glass beneath him. Somewhere in the distance, a whistle echoed. A train leaving for Liège, perhaps, carrying ghosts with it. He stopped at a small kiosk and bought a newspaper. The headline caught his eye. "Government official found dead. Apparent suicide." Beneath it, a photograph, Armand Bresson. The article claimed he had been discovered in his study, revolver beside him, a note of apology for errors of judgment. It was too neat, too sudden. Maigret felt no triumph, only the familiar chill that came when justice arrived, too fast. "They silenced him," he muttered, "and cleaned the table after." Back at headquarters, Lucas met him at the door. "We found the carriage driver. He remembers Cécile, says she got off near Rue du Bac, outside an old pension. He thought she seemed frightened." "Is she still there?" "No one answered when we knocked." They went at once. The pension was quiet, nearly empty. The landlady recognized her picture. "Yes, she's here. Room 12, but she said not to disturb her." Maigret climbed the narrow staircase, his steps measured, the wooden railing cold beneath his hand. He knocked once, no answer. Again, louder, still silence. Then swiggled the faint creak of a floorboard. "Cécile," he said softly, "it's Maigret." The door opened a fraction. Her face appeared in the gap, pale, drawn, eyes rimmed red. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. "I had to." She stepped aside. The room was dimly lit by a single lamp. Papers lay scattered on the table. Letters, ledger copies, and a photograph of Delaunay. "I've been trying to decide," she said, voice trembling, "whether to tell you everything or burn it all." "Tell me," Maigret said. She sank into a chair, her hands twisting in her lap. "Bresson wasn't alone. There's another, a man higher than him. He ordered everything. Delaunay discovered his name, wrote it in the missing letter. That's why they wanted it." "And where is the letter now?" "I don't know," she whispered. "I swear I don't. But I think René hid it somewhere, only I would recognize." Maigret's gaze moved to the small trunk by the wall. "May I?" She nodded. Inside were clothes, a few books, and a small music box. When he wound it, it played a soft, haunting melody. Beneath the velvet lining, something crinkled. An envelope, yellowed, sealed with wax. Cécile gasped. "That's it." Maigret held it gently. The wax bore the faint impression of a railway seal. "So he hid it in the music box, the one he gave you?" Before he could speak again, a noise outside. The floorboards creaked, a whisper of movement down the corridor. Lucas called out, "Chief!" The window shattered. A shot cracked through the air, splintering the lamp. Glass scattered like stars across the floor. Maigret dropped to the ground, pulling Cécile down with him. Another shot rang, then footsteps running down the stairs. Lucas burst in, revolver drawn. "You all right?" Maigret rose slowly, brushing glass from his sleeve. "We are now." He picked up the envelope, still intact, though the wax seal was chipped. "Someone doesn't want this opened." Lucas looked toward the darkened stairwell. "They'll try again." Maigret's pipe was gone, his voice cold. "And they'll find us waiting." He turned back to Cécile, who sat trembling in the corner. "You've carried this long enough," he said softly. "Now it's my turn." Outside, the rain began again, harder this time, a steady drumming against the shutters, as if Paris itself was counting down to the truth. The dawn was slow and uneasy. Paris woke under a sky the colour of tarnished pewter, its light hesitant, unsure if it wanted to touch the city. At the Quai des Orfèvres, Maigret stood at the window of his office, the unopened letter resting beside his pipe. The wax seal was fractured but still intact enough to guard its secret. Outside, the river rolled on, indifferent, as it had through centuries of guilt and redemption. He turned the envelope over in his hands. It was heavier than he expected, not in weight, but in consequence. Every instinct told him the truth inside would cost something, perhaps more than the law was willing to pay. Lucas entered, hair damp from the drizzle. "Chief, the ballistic report came back. The bullet from the boarding house, it matches a weapon registered to the Ministry Security Office." Maigret's eyes lifted slowly. "Bresson's jurisdiction." "Exactly." He nodded once. "And the shooter?" "Unidentified. But witnesses saw a man near Rue du Bac last night. Tall, with a limp. Same description as before. The phantom returned again, the man with the limp. A ghost, threading through their every lead. Maigret tamped his pipe mechanically, but didn't light it. "He's not a ghost," he murmured. "He's a servant. Someone's right hand." Lucas hesitated. "Then whose?" Maigret looked at the letter. "Let's find out." He broke the seal. Inside were 2 sheets, one written in Delaunay's hand, the other a carbon copy of a ministry transfer. The note was brief, precise, and devastating. Funds redirected through foreign intermediaries. Orders signed not by Bresson, but by Minister Armand Duval. If I vanish, he is why. The room seemed to tighten around him. Duval, the Minister of Finance himself. Maigret had met the man once, years ago, at a public ceremony. A face of calm authority, always smiling, always composed. He was the sort of man who could make corruption sound like duty. He folded the letter again and slid it into his pocket. "Lucas, take a copy of this and lock the original in the safe. Tell Janvier to keep quiet. No reports, no leaks. From now on we speak only to each other. You think they'll come for her again?" "They will," Maigret said, "and for us if we're not careful." By noon he was in Saint-Germain, the streets shimmering with thin rain. He entered the same café where Delaunay had met the woman weeks before. The same table, the same shadowed corner. He ordered nothing, just waited. When the door opened, Cécile stepped in, her coat drawn close, eyes scanning until they found him. She hesitated only a second before sitting across from him. "I thought you wouldn't come," she said quietly. "I keep my appointments." "You shouldn't." she whispered. "It's not safe." "It's never safe to tell the truth," Maigret replied. "That's why so few do." She smiled faintly, but her hands trembled as she stirred her untouched coffee. "I didn't know it would reach that high," she said. "René told me there was someone above Bresson, but not who. When he found the proof, he wanted to take it to the press. I begged him to wait." "You warned him," Maigret said. "That's why he went to your aunt's house. He trusted you." Her eyes shone with something between shame and defiance. "I thought I could protect him." "By keeping the letter?" She didn't answer. Outside, a tram rattled past. The window pane quivered, and for an instant Maigret saw a reflection that didn't belong. A man standing across the street, motionless, watching. His hat low, his left leg stiff. "Stay here," he murmured, rising. But when he stepped outside, the man was gone. Only the smell of rain and smoke remained, and the soft hiss of tires on wet cobblestones. When he returned, Cécile was gone too. On the table, beneath her cup, lay a single word scribbled in pencil: Hotel Savigny. The name meant something. An old, discreet hotel near the Boulevard Haussmann. The kind of place where politicians met their mistakes in private. He found her on the 3rd floor, the corridor dim and narrow. Her door was ajar. Inside, the curtains billowed from an open window, letting in the sound of the city. The room was empty, except for a suitcase on the bed and the faint smell of perfume. He crossed the room slowly, his instinct alert. On the writing desk, the telephone receiver dangled, swaying gently. Then, a movement behind him. "Don't turn around, Inspector." The voice was quiet, familiar, roughened by years of smoking. "You've been busy," Maigret said calmly. "I have my orders." He turned slowly to face the man with the limp. The revolver in his hand looked heavy, but his expression was steady. The kind of steadiness born from resignation, not confidence. "Orders from whom?" Maigret asked. "You already know." "Duval?" The man hesitated. A second too long. "You should forget this case. Walk away. It's not your fight." Maigret took a step closer. "Everything in Paris is my fight." The man's hand tightened on the trigger, but before he could act, a noise cut through the air. A sharp whistle, a door opening down the hall. He turned instinctively, and in that instant, Maigret lunged. The shot tore into the wall as the inspector's shoulder slammed into him. The gun fell. They grappled, crashing into the desk. Lucas burst in, revolver drawn. "Chief!" Maigret pinned the man's arm, breathing hard. "Don't shoot. He's more useful alive." The man glared up at him, blood on his lip. "You don't understand, Maigret. They'll bury this. And you with it." "Perhaps," Maigret said, lighting his pipe with steady hands. "But not before I dig them up first." They took him away in silence. Outside, the rain had stopped and the sky was clearing, a false peace spreading across the rooftops. But in the inspector's mind, the picture was complete now. Delaunay, Lenoir, Cécile, all threads in a single tapestry woven by men who lived above suspicion. That night, as he sat alone in his office, the city lights shimmering on the river, Maigret opened his notebook and wrote a single line. Justice must begin somewhere, even if it ends nowhere. He closed the book, exhaled smoke into the lamplight, and stared out into Paris, the city that slept under the illusion of innocence. Somewhere, in the minister's mansion, a phone was ringing. By morning, the city looked polished, washed clean by the night's rain. But the calm was deceptive, like a smile hiding a wound. The newspapers were already carrying the story of Bresson's suicide, a neat column buried on page 2, accompanied by the obligatory photograph of mourners and the headline, "A Faithful Servant of the Republic." Maigret read it slowly over coffee, his jaw tightening with every line. The story was too polished, too precise. Someone had written it before the man had even died. The telephone on his desk rang. Janvier's voice came through, tense and clipped. "Chief, we've got a problem. The man we arrested last night, he's gone." Maigret didn't move. "Gone? Escaped. The guard on duty swears he never left. But the cell's empty, lock unbroken, he just vanished." The inspector put down his cup, the faint clink echoing in the still room. "Then we're not fighting men anymore, Janvier. We're fighting ghosts." He hung up, rose and walked to the window. The fog was returning, creeping back from the river in slow, rolling waves. It slid between the bridges and wrapped round the lampposts as if reclaiming what the light had stolen. Lucas entered, face drawn. "Chief, they're closing."
"Ranks! Orders from above. Our investigation into the ministry is suspended. The file's been pulled." "By whom?" "Duval's office." Maigret gave a low, humourless laugh. "Of course. When the river runs dirty, you dam it, not clean it." He turned, his face shadowed beneath the lamplight. "They want this buried, Lucas, but we still have the letter. That's our proof." Lucas hesitated. "If they know that, we'll have more than suspension to worry about." "Let them come," Maigret said quietly. "The truth's already out, even if no one dares to say it yet." That afternoon, a messenger arrived, a young boy with pale hair and a nervous look. "From Madame Lemoine," he said, handing Maigret a note before vanishing back into the street. It was short. "She came to me. She's frightened. Come quickly." He left at once, coat collar up, pipe clenched unlit between his teeth. The sky had turned the colour of pewter again, and the fog swallowed the narrow streets like a living thing. When he reached the widow's house, the door was ajar. The smell of damp wool and cold ashes filled the air. "Madame Lemoine?" he called softly. No answer. The living room was dim, curtains drawn. On the table stood a teacup, still warm. Beside it, a handbag, Cecile's. He climbed the stairs slowly. The boards creaked with each step. Halfway up, he heard it, the faint click of a door shutting above. "Cecile?" A whisper came from the dark. "They're here." Then a figure burst from the shadows. A struggle, a flash of movement, a glint of metal. Maigret ducked as a bullet splintered the doorframe beside his head. He lunged forward, grasping the assailant's wrist. The gun fell, skidding across the floor. The man's hat came loose, revealing a narrow face and cold, frightened eyes. Not the man with the limp, but someone younger, sharper. "Who sent you?" Maigret growled. The man said nothing. He only looked past Maigret toward the stairs, as if expecting rescue. Then a sound, a door, slamming downstairs, footsteps fleeing into the street. By the time Lucas arrived with reinforcements, the attacker was gone, leaving behind only the pistol and a torn scrap of paper from Cecile's handbag. It bore a single line in typewritten ink. "The minister denies all knowledge." Madame Lemoine was unharmed, though shaken. "She came an hour ago," she said, trembling. "Said she had nowhere left to run. She left her bag when she heard a noise outside." "Where did she go?" "She didn't say, only that she needed to see the inspector one last time." Maigret exhaled slowly. "Then she'll come to me, if she's still alive." That night, he returned to his flat on Boulevard Richelieu, but the city's sounds followed him. Footsteps on wet pavement, the cry of a train in the distance, the restless murmur of the Seine. He couldn't sleep. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw Delaunay's still face, Lenoir's.
Blood on the bedsheet, Bresson's empty office, and now Cécile, running somewhere through the fog, hunted by men whose faces she might once have trusted. At 3 a.m, the phone rang. "Chief Inspector?" The voice was faint, hoarse. hers. "I can't run anymore." "Where are you?" "Pont des Arts. I'm tired, Maigret. I just want it to end." "Stay where you are," he said. "I'm coming." He arrived 15 minutes later. The bridge was nearly deserted, the fog dense enough to hide everything but the nearest lamp. She stood by the railing, her coat fluttering in the breeze, face pale in the dim light. "I didn't know where else to go," she said softly. "You did right." "They won't let me live," she whispered. "I heard them talking in the street. They said the file's gone, that Duval is safe." "Safe for now," Maigret said, "but men like him forget. The river keeps everything it's given." Her eyes glistened with tears. "I didn't mean for anyone to die." "I know." For a long moment they stood in silence, listening to the water. Then a car's engine echoed faintly from the far bank. Maigret's hand went instinctively to his revolver. Headlights flared through the mist, one car, then another. "They've found us," she breathed. "Stay behind me," he said. The cars stopped at the end of the bridge. Shadows emerged, 2, maybe 3 men, walking slowly. The fog swallowed their faces. Maigret fired once into the air. The echo thundered across the river. The men froze. Then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, they retreated, disappearing into the mist. The cars roared to life, tires screeching as they sped away. The silence that followed was immense. Cécile turned to him, her voice barely audible. "You can't protect me forever." "No," Maigret said quietly, "but I can make sure you're heard." He guided her off the bridge, arms steady beneath hers. The city's lamps flickered behind them like dying stars, and the fog closed once more over the water, carrying away the last traces of pursuit. By dawn, he was back at the Quai des Orfèvres, the letter spread across his desk again. The ink had begun to fade, but the truth it contained burned brighter than ever. He leaned back, eyes heavy, watching the smoke curl toward the ceiling. "The fog's lifting," Lucas said softly from the doorway. Maigret shook his head. "No, it's just beginning to thicken where they think no one can see." Outside, the river gleamed faintly beneath the pale morning light. Serene, deceitful, eternal. The morning began with a stillness that was almost unreal. The fog had lifted at last, leaving the Seine like a mirror of dull silver beneath a pale sky. For the first time in weeks, sunlight touched the rooftops of Paris. Hesitant, filtered, but undeniably there. Inside the Quai des Orfèvres, the corridors felt strangely hollow, as if the night's pursuit had drained the very air from the building. Maigret sat at his desk, a fresh pot of coffee untouched beside him. Across from him lay the envelope, open now, its secret exposed, and a single newspaper folded neatly in half. The headline read, "Minister Duval to resign amid inquiry." The article was carefully worded, cautious, the tone one of dignified regret rather than outrage. Yet between the lines, Maigret could hear the silent scream of political preservation. He took a slow drag from his pipe. The flavour had grown bitter. "They found a way to bury the truth in plain sight," he murmured. Lucas, standing near the window, nodded grimly. "He'll resign quietly. They'll hold a committee, and within a year he'll be a director of some bank. That's how it goes, Chief." "Yes," Maigret said. "The Republic doesn't like scandal. It prefers amnesia." A knock interrupted them. Janvier entered, carrying a thin envelope. "This came by courier. Marked for you personally. No return name, but the paper? Expensive." Maigret slit it open. Inside was a single sheet, typed neatly. "The matter is closed. You have done your duty. Now let it rest. No signature." But he knew the voice between the lines. The quiet authority of the ministry itself, the voice that spoke in orders disguised as gratitude. He placed it in a drawer without comment. By afternoon, the sky had darkened again. clouds moving swiftly over the city. The streets shimmered with the reflection of gaslight and puddles, and the wind smelled faintly of wet iron. Maigret walked alone through the Latin Quarter, coat collar turned up, thinking. The city was moving on, newspapers already shifting to new scandals, cafe conversations returning to gossip and sport. Only the river seemed unchanged, steady and knowing. When he returned home that evening, there was a letter waiting on his doorstep. The handwriting was delicate, unmistakably hers. "Inspector," it read, "I am leaving Paris. Not to flee, but to forget you were right. The truth needed to be told, even if no one listens. Thank you for seeing me as something more than my mistakes. CL," he read it twice, then folded it gently and slipped it into his pocket. The next morning he stood once more on the bridge at Pont des Arts. The air was cold, but clear. From there he could see both the grandeur and the grime of the city, the chimneys of Saint-Germain, the faint hum of carriages crossing toward the Louvre, the endless movement of a place that thrived on forgetting. He lit his pipe. The smoke curled upward, twisting in the sunlight. Somewhere below, the river whispered its slow, eternal murmur. "Do you ever wonder," Lucas asked quietly beside him, "whether it makes any difference? All this?" Maigret smiled faintly. "Sometimes. But then I remember, it's not about winning, it's about bearing witness. Paris has its priests and its poets. We have our notebooks and our dead." Lucas didn't reply. He looked out over the water where a barge moved steadily downstream, carrying timber and the faint sound of a radio crackling from its cabin. They stood there a while longer, saying nothing. Later, back at headquarters, Maigret returned to his office. The typewriter waited, the keys gleaming faintly in the light. He rolled in a blank page and began to type. Slowly, deliberately, as if each word carried weight. Case of the Rue des Martyrs. Concluded. Motive, suppression of financial irregularities within the Ministry of Finance. Perpetrators, deceased or unpunished. Secondary victim, Cécile Lemoine, surviving witness. Remarks, the fog cleared too late to save the living, but not too late to name the dead. He stopped, stared at the final line, and then, almost as an afterthought, typed one more sentence. The city forgets, but the river remembers. The room filled with the faint rhythm of raindrops against the glass, the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Somewhere below, the sound of footsteps echoed through the stone hall. An officer hurrying, a door closing, life resuming its usual pace. Maigret sat back, pipe between his teeth, and closed his eyes for a moment. The air smelled of tobacco, paper, and rain. Then he rose, reached for his coat, and turned off the lamp. The office fell into shadow. Only the faint glow from the window remained, casting a reflection across the desk, the outline of a man who had spent his life chasing ghosts through the alleys of Paris, and who, for one night at least, had caught one. Outside, the fog began to roll in again, gentle and familiar, wrapping the city in its old, forgiving silence. That night, Paris seemed quieter than it had in weeks. The rain had stopped, the streets shone black under the gas lamps, and the reflections of the bridges stretched like golden ribbons across the Seine. Somewhere in the distance, a steamer's horn sounded, long, mournful, like a memory calling out to no one. Maigret walked along the embankment, hands deep in the pockets of his heavy coat. The air carried that unmistakable scent of the river, damp stone, oil, and faint tobacco from unseen passers-by. The city was returning to its rhythm, markets opening early, cafes murmuring with the first voices of dawn, the night workers disappearing into sleep. Only Maigret remained in motion, as if the case still followed him in the fog of his thoughts. He reached the Pont Neuf, where the mist was beginning to rise again. The place where it had all begun, a man dead in the fog, a letter unsent, a story that had written itself in silence. He paused, leaned on the railing, and let the pipe smoke drift across the water. Footsteps echoed behind him. Lucas approached slowly, his silhouette outlined by the pale light. "You should get some rest, Chief," he said gently. "It's over now." Maigret gave a faint smile. "You think so? Cases like this never really end. They just stop being convenient. To remember." Lucas hesitated, then offered a folded newspaper. "You'll want to see this." The headline was short, discreet, but final. "Minister Duval cleared of all wrongdoing." Beneath it, a smaller line, "Confidential sources disprove false allegations." The article praised the minister's cooperation with authorities, his commitment to integrity, and the swift resolution of a regrettable misunderstanding. Maigret read it once, then twice, and folded it back without expression. "The Republic cleans its hands quickly," he said, "even when there's blood under the nails." Lucas looked down at the river. "And Cécile?" "She's gone," Maigret said softly. "A small pension in Brittany under another name. She'll live quietly, I hope. The world will forget her soon enough." "Do you ever get tired of it, Chief?" Lucas asked. "Chasing the truth when no one wants to see it?" Maigret exhaled a long stream of smoke. "Sometimes. But I think what tires me more is the forgetting. The way people walk past things that should stop them cold." He tapped the railing. "Paris is full of ghosts, Lucas. The trick is to listen when they whisper." The younger man said nothing. They stood there together, watching the faint ripples spread beneath the bridge. Later, when he returned to his flat, Maigret poured himself a small glass of Calvados and sat by the window. The light from the street lamps glowed through the curtains, turning the air amber and soft. On the table lay his notebook, open to the last entry. He wrote a single line beneath it. "Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it only sighs." He closed the book, took a slow sip, and let the warmth settle in his chest. The city hummed faintly outside, the creak of carriage wheels, the murmur of laughter from a distant cafe, the soft toll of a bell from somewhere across the river. His eyes wandered to the photograph still pinned to the wall, the crime scene on Rue des Martyrs. The body long buried, the case filed and closed, but in that frozen moment, Paris had been stripped bare. The fog, the cobblestones, the dim yellow light, all of it had whispered the same thing. Nothing stays hidden forever. He thought of Delaunay, of Lenoir, of Cécile. Names that would never make the papers, faces that would fade into the city's blur. Yet somewhere, beneath the weight of bureaucracy and indifference, their story had been told, if only to a man who refused not to listen. When the clock struck midnight, Maigret rose, placed his hat on the peg, and turned off the lamp. The room fell into quiet shadow. Outside, the fog thickened once more, soft and familiar, curling along the streets like memory returning home. He paused by the window before drawing the curtains. The Seine glimmered faintly below, eternal and patient. The city would wake again tomorrow, new crimes waiting to be solved, new lies waiting to be believed. And he, pipe, coat, and the weight of the years, would still be there, listening to its heartbeat, tracing its secrets through the smoke. He murmured softly, almost to himself, "It never ends, only begins again." And then, as the last echo of the bell faded across the sleeping city, Maigret turned away from the river, his shadow merging with the quiet of the room. Paris breathed on. The fog closed over the bridge, the light dimmed, and the night returned to its silence.